If you haven't been to a US Disney park in a hot second, the most notable thing that you have missed out on is Disney's theme park iteration of Star Wars through the land of Galaxy's Edge. I've already done a full video on this land and why, in my opinion, it's the best thing to happen to Star Wars, period. But I made that video back when the pandemic was still a thing. I had only visited the land one time and I didn't even get to go on the main attraction of the land because they hadn't opened it yet. But now that it's open and now that the pandemic is hopefully done, I want to talk about that attraction because upon going on this ride for the first time, not only was I taken aback at how much of a realistic spectacle of a ride it was, but also from how incredibly well it paid attention to its story and how it did everything in its right to go above and beyond to amaze people. Today, I'm going to be talking about why Rise of the Resistance is perfection. So what is Rise of the Resistance? It's not really a ride that you can just explain to someone like how you can explain a roller coaster or even a dark ride. It's a very specific, one-of-a-kind ride that utilizes all of the latest technological innovations to basically give you a Star Wars experience that is very close to lifelike. But it isn't just the technology that makes it believable, it's the commitment to the story, the fleshed out character roles the cast members portray, and even just the way the ride is written. So let's start at the beginning with the story. It seems like a pretty simple setup. You've been recruited by the Resistance, and the base that you're staying at in Batuu is starting to get on the First Order's radar, so the Resistance takes you on a shuttle to get to the new base on Bakara. This is where the first part of the ride starts. You board into a Star Tours-like room and feel the ship blast off into space right before the First Order overtakes your ship. After the tractor beam pulls you onto the ship, the doors open to reveal that you've been captured by the First Order and you are now aboard a Star Destroyer. You and your party are then walked to an interrogation room where Kylo Ren and General Hux attempt to rip the location of the secret Resistance base out of your memory. Then, when Kylo and Hux leave, a section of the wall is sliced open by members of the Resistance, ready to board you onto prisoner transport vehicles. This is the main part of the ride, where you encounter a few stormtroopers, some AT-ATs, and even Kylo himself a few times, before defeating him and escaping the Star Destroyer and heading back to where you started. Now, the story itself isn't anything to drop your jaw over, since it's just a fun little backstory for this ride, but it's the commitment to going the extra mile to making this story believable that makes it so impressive. For starters, the story begins in Batuu, just outside of Blackspire Outpost, because as a guest, that's where you are before you get in line for this ride. The gap between the world of the ride and the world around you has already been filled by entering Galaxy's Edge, because the land is the world of the ride. So already from the start, the premise is believable to the world directly around you. Anyways, quickly glossing over the fact that Disney created a pretty freaking believable hologram by messing with glass and mirrors and stuff, when you get on the ship to be lifted off into space, you board the ship through the right door relative to facing Lieutenant Beck. What ends up happening is that you get pulled into a tractor beam and enter a Star Destroyer. Now, seeing that there are two doors on either side of the transport, you would assume that if you entered through the right door, you'll probably exit the Star Destroyer on the left. Because even though Disney wants you to believe that the spaceship is moving, the room is just gonna stay put. But no, this is where Disney decides to pour millions of dollars into flexing their skills on you by rotating the entire room without you knowing. Basically, since the room is already shaking Star Tours style since you're flying, your brain doesn't really notice that the entire room is also turning counterclockwise on a track. You can actually see the imprint of the turntable if you look at the ground when you're entering the ship, which means the door that you entered from is also the door that you exit from, and without realizing it, you have gone from the quiet outpost of Batuu to Kylo Ren's Star Destroyer. Having you enter and exit from the same door when, like, they very easily could have just had you exit from the other door reinforces the immersion of the ride by having you wonder how in the hell the door just opened into a different room than where you were before. It could be because Disney created a complicated turntable system, or maybe it's because it's real. Right before you exit the transport, Poe says that he's gonna go get some backup to help you guys and then blasts off into lightspeed. This element trickles through the ride, showing that the writers of this story made sure to tie up all loose ends. When you're being interrogated, you may think that it's kinda overly convenient that Kylo and Hux left the room right before you get broken out of, and then later on the bridge, we find out that it's because Poe went and actually got backup. This good writing is what makes the story feel well-rounded and believable and not subject to ex machinas. Also, side note, I think it's really cool that they showed a little notification thing pop up on the panel, and that's how Hux knew to tell Kylo that he's needed on the bridge. It took me a few ride-throughs to even notice this little detail, and it makes the whole ride so much better. The transition between the first ride portion and the second ride portion has the most potential for the immersion to be broken, because guests need to be grouped up into interrogation rooms and boarded onto the ride itself. But since Disney has some of the most amazing and talented workers, this weakness becomes a strength. The cast members play such a vital role in making guests feel more immersed in this experience, because they aren't animatronics or screens, they're real people who need to be there in order to get you on the ride, but also need to keep the story alive. A lot of Disney rides require that a cast member plays some sort of character to accompany the ride. but that character has never been as defined into a story as this ride has made them. The First Order generals are going to be rude to you, they're going to say threatening stuff to you, and they're not going to hold back if you try to be fun with them. While the Resistance members are going to be urgently rushing you onto the prisoner transports before the First Order finds out. If we had just had some boring crowd control people operating this ride, then like it would not be as effective as it is now. These people play these characters so that they can fill the void between the two separate parts of the ride, and they play the characters really well. Shout out to all the cast members that run this ride, and honestly just all cast members in general. Y'all are literally doing the greatest work for Disney. If it weren't for you guys, the parks would not be operational, so thank you. One of the biggest surprises of this experience is when the wall of the interrogation room is sawed open and then like literally thrown to the side to get you on the second half of the ride. I freaking hate it that I had already watched a video of this happening before I had went on the ride, because I actually think I would have passed out if I saw this in real life. This part of the experience is simultaneously so unexpected and mesmerizing, yet believable within the story. It makes sense that this would happen in the story, but like the fact that it actually happened in front of your eyes is like kind of shocking. It genuinely feels like you are inside of a Star Wars movie and you are the main character. Honestly, nothing that happens in this ride is expected, because it's so different from any traditional ride, not only with how much it involves you within the story, but just how it tells the story. Even the way the ride tells you to fasten your seatbelt so that Disney avoids liability lawsuits is done in a fun way. It's explained briefly by Beck with these cool Star Wars graphics to accompany it without feeling like a break in the story. Once you make your first encounter with the stormtroopers, the first piece of incredible technology is introduced. The floating lasers that you see them shoot are actually invisible spiraling tubes that illuminate up the spiral, and bullet holes are projected onto the wall of the Star Destroyer to create the illusion that the stormtroopers blasted a hole in the wall. This isn't a movie, there's no CGI because you're there in person, and this is honestly the coolest way that I've ever seen anyone try to depict CGI in real life. Like the first time that I watched a video of this ride on the day it opened at Disney World, I seriously could not believe what I was watching at the AT-AT part, because the lasers look so convincing since the light beam is slightly hanging down and the bullet holes get projected onto the wall. Like it just looks so real. I don't know how to explain it, man. Okay, so everyone knows that the lightsaber cutting through the fake elevator is just a stick on a turntable, but what actually kind of shocked me when I was doing research about this is that this scene of Kylo walking towards your transport right before you get into the elevator is actually a lot more complex than it may seem. There's an object that is being moved forward on a track while Kylo's walking in place recording is projected onto the moving object. They even flash these blinding lights at you so that you can avoid seeing the object as it comes closer to you. And what I would probably consider the climax of the story is when we encounter Kylo Ren. As he tells us, "There's no escape. We've been cornered by Kylo, and now we have to either tell him where the base is or die." But since there's a battle going on outside of the Star Destroyer, it doesn't take long for a ship to crash into us and Kylo to be blasted off into space, probably to reenact what her mom did in The Last Jedi. But what's so awesome for this ride is that this is only the climax for the story of the ride. The climax for your experience comes just after, when you get to the most thrilling part of the ride. The most thrilling part of any roller coaster is when you go on the big drop, and for this ride there's no difference. Your prisoner carts get navigated into one of the 4 escape pods, and then, well, I can't even imagine what it must have been like for the people who went on this ride not knowing that it was gonna drop right here. This is the cherry on top of the entire experience, because not only is it super thrilling, but it makes perfect sense within the story and like the physics of the world, because you kind of need to go down if you already went up in the AT-AT room. And the best part about this is that by exiting through the escape pod, you're now back in Batuu where you started, which makes this entire ride 100% immersive. Rise of the Resistance story and effects perfectly show how the ride is dedicated to creating an immersive experience that feels real, from how minute the details of the story go to how realistic the Imagineering of the effects look. But I feel like it goes a little deeper than that. Walt Disney created Disneyland to create a place where kids and adults can live in their fantasies. The only problem is that this was back in the 1950s, and the technology to create something that accurately depicts reality was simply not there. So kids would go on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride and see cardboard cutouts and accept that as reality because it's the best thing they're able to see. Kids now will go on a ride like Mr. Toad and think, dang, this is pretty dated, because they've been spoiled by the new stuff that's able to be done. Rise of the Resistance blows all of that out of the water with the new technology it uses. experiences. It sits on the current pedestal of how realistic you can make a ride look. And the best part is that there's room for improvement. I say that Rise of the Resistance is perfect, and I mean that by the standards one would hold to it now. In the future though, those standards will be risen, and the ride will look just like how people think of Mr. Toad now. Outdated. But what will not be outdated is its dedication to using everything in its inventory to create an experience that is lifelike. Mr. Toad had a nice little story to accompany its ride, but there wasn't any reason for the guest to be on that ride. There wasn't a backstory as to why you're being invited into this world, and there wasn't any gateway between the real world and the fantasy world of Mr. Toad, because while Fantasyland is a great land, it definitely is not any more of a Mr. Toad specific world as it is a Peter Pan specific world. Also, the ride ends when you're in hell, and there's not really an explanation as to how you get from hell to the real world. But Galaxy's Edge and Rise of the Resistance are dedicated to doing everything possible to keeping the storytelling and immersion alive through all of the technology in its grasp. When you get on the ride, there is a story reason for why you are in Batuu, and there is a story reason for why you are on Batuu when you get off of the ride as well. I really hope that as technology advances, people remember just how dedicated this ride was to telling a good story and apply it to future projects, because that is the only way to make something feel believable. And with that, I conclude my simping for Rise of the Resistance. I will say I think it's absolutely hysterical the amount of time that you have to wait in line for this ride if you don't fork up $25 per person. In fact, last time I went on it, I waited 4 complete hours, which in my opinion is kind of a long time. But this ride wholeheartedly deserves all of the attention it is getting for being a game changer in the business of escapism. And with that, I conclude the video. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to subscribe. I've got a playlist of other Disneyland videos if you want to check that out, and I'll see ya in Radiator Springs.